Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric on our continuing series where I review every Capcom play system, CP Dash, CPS2, and CPS3 game ever made. Today we have a combo episode, both Saturday Night Slam Masters and Muscle Bomber Duo. Because while they are different games with different mechanics, they're basically just reskins of each other. Before we get too far involved though, if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined, you want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down there as well. Because Hagar is a Patreon member, so why aren't you? But these are two great games. My only complaint about them, actually I have two, is one, I love wrestling games that actually have real wrestlers in them. Now, I haven't watched wrestling in probably 15-20 years now, but as a kid growing up, I absolutely loved it. So any wrestling game with wrestlers from TV, I was all about. Of course, this being a Capcom game, it's going to have Capcom characters. So while it is really fun and it's a great experience, I just wish that this actually had real WWF characters from the 90s in it. My only other complaint is trying to pin somebody in this game is illogically hard. I can never quite figure it out. It just seems like the button to pin is touchy. But short of those two minor complaints, one really being not a complaint at all, they couldn't get the license for WWF, I'm sure. This game is absolutely outstanding. It's exactly what you would want in a wrestling game. All of the moves are good once you pull them off. It takes a little bit of time to learn the game. The graphics are amazing. The sound is awesome. All the animation in the background there with the fans. There's so much going on in this game. All the different characters have their own ring intros and music, and all the stages are slightly different enough so that you feel like they're not just reusing the same assets. But when you're playing the game well, it's a lot of fun. Although, like I said, it takes a little bit of a learning curve to get used to how these games work. It's not like playing a fighting game. Some of the inputs are similar to fighting game mechanics, but the timing and strategy is a lot different. So once you stop thinking about it as a Capcom fighting game or a Capcom beat-em-up game and realize Capcom was actually trying to make a real wrestling game, you're going to be able to enjoy it much more. And you can do ring outs, so you can pick up chairs and different weapons. It's not a huge mechanic of the game, and honestly, when you have your opponent's health down to 0, going out of the ring would just risk you getting timed out. But you'll see here, I roll my opponent and I hit the pin button, but he gets up so quickly that it becomes a real pain to try to pin him. What I actually end up doing more often than not is pinning in from a suplex or other wrestling move, because that seems to be a lot easier to actually execute, and that referee's 3 count is about as slow as it is on TV when they're trying to fake the match. But yeah, it's just a really fun game, although it becomes a lot more fun with 2 players. It's the type of game that comes alive when you're playing with a friend. You don't need to be on an arcade cabinet. You could play this on a console. You could emulate it however you want to play it. But having 2 people involved is a ton of fun. In classic Capcom, there's going to be the portraits with a little bit of story in between each match. Now that we're moving on to Mexico, the crowd is slightly different, the color's a little different, the ring intro is going to be a little bit different, but you can see you're not going to get a ton of diversity in where you're wrestling. It's not like a WWE game where there's backstage matches, cage matches, things like that. Basically, your first match is going to be almost identical to your last match. What I really do like is all the unique music for the characters, and I love that that monkey's up on the top rope clapping for his buddy there. But go ahead and enjoy the music for about 30-45 seconds, and I'll come back and we'll get right into Muscle Bomber Duo and talk about what that game has to offer. But enjoy! The music and sound effects in this game are awesome, but that's kind of to be expected because the Capcom CP System Dash utilizes the Q sound chip, which is basically trying to emulate a surround sound system. It isn't true surround sound, but it does a lot of things about moving the audio around in your speakers to make it sound like it is a surround sound kind of thing happening. But moving right on to Muscle Bomber Duo, this is the same game with completely different mechanics, but I would say of the two versions of this game, if you have friends to play with, Muscle Bomber Duo is 100% going to be the game you want to play, because unlike the first game, which was one player versus one player, this is a tag team battle action game. So you have 4 players in the ring at any one time, and we'll pick our characters here to show you guys some new people. Now, I will say that there are some downsides to this version. It still plays the same, it still is fun, but these ring intros have been reduced down to having the same music more often than not for both sides, so it's not like you get individual music depending on what opponent you're fighting. But if you have friends and you're playing with them, this is insanely fun because you have 4 people in the ring, all beating the ever-loving hell out of each other. It just gets wild and crazy and almost sometimes hard to follow. But the basic mechanic is you want to defeat your opponents. You have to pin both of them before the time runs out. If you pin one of your opponents, then you and your friends, or the CPU in this instance, can beat up on the remaining guy and it becomes almost impossible to lose at that moment in time. On the inverse, if you lose your partner and you're fighting 2 CPU opponents or 2 of your friends, winning feels amazing if you're able to pull it off because it is at that point 2-on-1. So you can see mechanically it is the exact same game. The moves are basically the same, the setup's the same, a lot of the music and sound effects are identical, but how you play the game differs completely. And I like this because it kind of reminds me of, you know, the Royal Rumble battle matches in some of the old WWF games, the 16-bit games, and I love those so much both in arcades and on consoles. And I kind of wish that Capcom had pushed a little further with Muscle Bomber Duo, because other than the fact that you get a tag team game, there really isn't much else going on. But you will see that somebody threw a can and somebody threw a bottle into the ring, and you get more options to use weapons in Muscle Bomber Duo than you did on Saturday Night Slam Masters. But this soundtrack is also awesome, so listen for about 30 seconds and I'll be back and tell you why. If you've never played either of these games, you should at least try one. I'm not sure what it is, but Capcom definitely improved the pinning mechanic between Saturday Night Slam Masters 2 Muscle Bomber Duo, because actually pinning your opponent on the ring is much easier than the original game. So I'm not sure what sort of code tweak they did or input tweak happened there, but I will say that it makes the game a lot easier to play, because in Saturday Night Slam Masters, more often than not, I'm not able to pin on the mat. And I actually talked about that game previously a long time ago on the channel because I played the FM Towns Marty version, which is very close to the arcade original. But if you do want to play these games, I would definitely just emulate them or pick them up on a collection, because if you're going to buy an arcade PCB that's going to cost a decent amount of money and is wrestling based, this would probably be the last one I actually buy, because there's so many good arcade WWF games out there that I would recommend before Saturday Night Slam Masters or Muscle Bomber Duo. Now, if you own all of those and you want another arcade wrestling game, these are definitely worth picking up. I'm not saying they're bad games whatsoever, I'm just saying that other wrestling games did wrestling a little bit better, and if you're like me, you want to actually play as characters from real life that you may have seen on TV back in the day. But like I said, these are amazing multiplayer games. If you have a bunch of friends in a room and you have enough controllers to play these together, it's just a wild time. You're yelling at each other, you throw a few beers in the mix, and you're having an awesome time. Because it has a lot of similarities to Capcom's fighting and beat 'em up games, but it kind of mashes those two genres together into the wrestling genre. But if you're used to Capcom inputs, you're going to be pretty good at this game pretty quickly, and seeing the ending can be quite difficult because in the later rounds, your CPU player is not nearly as good as who he's fighting against, and you have to basically hold up the side of your team for everybody. But short of that, that is Saturday Night Slam Masters and Muscle Bomber Duo for the Capcom CP System Dash. There's not that many games on the platforms that are going to be moving on to the Capcom CPS2 very quickly, and we will have another video in this series next week. But leave me a question or comment down below. Have you played these games? Did you enjoy them? What do you think of them? What is your favorite wrestling game? Because it's a genre that I've always enjoyed playing. I still play the games on occasion, even though I haven't watched wrestling for probably the last 15-16 years. But yeah, you can definitely do a lot worse than these two games. I absolutely love them. They're definitely worth checking out, and it's fun to hear that Q sound chip because Capcom uses it a ton on the CP System Dash and especially the CPS2, and it definitely has a certain sound to it that most arcade games don't. But short of that, Hagar here is going to try to smack me around a little bit, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.